I would be so pleased.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
How's everyone doing? Good. I didn't anticipate this many people. This is fantastic. My name is Marty Loftus. Just give you a little bit of background before we get into my presentation. This is my 23rd year teaching high school visual art. I started off in a very small town in central Illinois named Cuba, which was about population 1,400. From there I moved on to St. Petersburg, Florida, where I was teaching at a school of about 2,500. I spent about 6 years at St. Pete High School, and then I moved to a magnet program there for 4 years. This is my 3rd year in Colorado. I spent my first 2 years at East High School in Denver, and this is my first year teaching at Denver School of the Arts. I love my job. I'm truly passionate about what I do. I think we are very lucky to be doing what we're doing. In addition to teaching, I also work for College Board. So I have been an AP reader for a while. The last year being my first year as a table leader as well. So I got to be part of the leadership team where we actually set the rubric, pick out standard sets, and explain to the rest of the readers when they come in what a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 looks like. So it was a really, really great opportunity to get some additional perspective. The 2 years prior to that also, the best 2 weeks of my life. I was part of a team of 3 that curated the National Exhibition for AP. So during those 2 weeks, for 2 years in a row, we were sent any quality portfolios that scored straight 6s, 6.65s, and from the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of works, we narrowed that down to 30 each year that would go into the National Exhibition. And part of that is what we're going to be talking about today, because one of the tasks that we learned that we were talking about in curating that exhibition was picking out some pieces that were more along the lines of outliers. So when we look at works at AP2 where we see this tremendous amount of technical skill, they're always going to be really high scoring. And the thing is, everyone knows that, right? I can go to my family and say, listen, what do you think of this? That's amazing, right? But we're trying to pick out works that maybe don't have always that huge, massive amount of technical skill, but hit other parts of that rubric really, really hard. The risk-taking, the innovation, the originality, the verb. So those are things even some of our students who maybe don't possess that super high level of technical skill can still score extremely high on the AP portfolio. Okay? How many of you are currently teaching advanced placement? Awesome. Wonderful, wonderful. So, have any of you been a reader before or gone through that process? So, just to give you some context, because this was an eye-opener for me the first time going through there, what the reading looks like. So we are, for a week, 2 weeks, with the leadership team, in essentially kind of like an airline hangar in Salt Lake City. So back here, what you see are these long, long tables where all of the quality sections are laid out. So each student has their quality portfolio. We have a group of paid people who come around and actually set up the work. Readers never touch it. We never know anything about the student other than what we see from their actual physical work. In the foreground, we see banks and banks of computers where readers are going to score both the breadth section and the concentration section. There's a lot of stuff. In a lot of ways, it kind of looks like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, where there is so much available there that it seems like an incredibly, incredibly daunting task, and it is. In addition to actually scoring these works, we spent a tremendous amount of time actually aligning ourselves to the rubric. So before any scores are done, we spend a lot of time looking at these standard sets that the table leaders pick up the week before and having those readers score them after we've already done that, so that they start to recognize what those scoring points look like. Does that make sense? So, as daunting as it is, that group of readers, which I think this last year was about 130, 140 of us, that seems like a really small number. But the speed of the reading is incredibly, incredibly fast. So even if I'm looking at a quality section laid out on the table right here, this is the amount of time that a reader will typically spend with the work. So if I'm coming up and I'm about ready to score, I see the work, and that's the score. So it's extremely important that your work, your students' work, has a high level of immediacy as well. It seems crazy that that can happen and that it can be accurate. I will say last year, and there's a process of discrepancy where the scores can't be further than a point apart. So what happens is if they are, those go to discrepancies, and table leaders will take another look at those. Those are experienced readers who have done this for a while, and they ultimately decide on that score. I think after 37,000 2D portfolios, there was a 2% discrepancy rate. So believe it or not, the reading is extremely efficient and really accurate. So last year for our score distributions in 2018, there were 36,000 2D portfolios, 5,700 3D, and 21,000 portfolios, so 62,700. So again, multiply that by the 12 images for concentration, 12 works in breadth, 8 works if it's in the 3D portfolio and the finer quality pieces. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So the readers, there's going to be 2 people scoring each breadth section independently, not knowing each other. 2 readers that are going to be scoring concentration, and 3 to score quality. So that scale, and I think sometimes there's some misconceptions about that, is on a 1 through 6 scale. Right? So while our students get a score that's 1 through 5, when we actually score the portfolios, that rubric goes 1 through 6, with 6 being excellent. So there's a total of 72 points possible for every portfolio. Anyone want to guess how many perfect scores there were last year? Out of 62,700. This is kind of fun. Yes. Anybody have an idea?
3.
10.
0.
144. 0. Okay, so that's broad. They are small. They are small. 7, 1, 18 for a total of 26. So for students to score a perfect score, it's pretty unique. Now the scoring is, again, we're curved on that. Perfect scores are hard to find. Hi.
So I'm still confused. Portfolio, okay. So what can get a 6, or how does a 6 and a 5, how, what's, okay.
So let's say you and I are scoring 2D breadth portfolios.
Okay.
So you're looking at your computer screen and you're going to score on a rubric that goes 1 through 6.
Okay.
So the 6 is excellent,
Right.
The 5 is strong, good, moderate, weak, and poor, right? So when it's all said and done, and they have those scores based on that 72 points from all 3 portfolios, then they look at that and they do that kind of curve. So while everything is scored 1 through 6 from a reader's perspective, the student will get ultimately a score that's 1 through 5. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So these are just scoring points, but the ultimate score from AP for the student aggregate is going to be 1 through 5. Okay? So this is a little bit more information. We can skip through this, but it talks just a little bit. And this is all on the AP website. They've done some really great additions over the last few years. When I first started out with AP, the website was a little bit difficult to navigate. I think some people are still having some problems with that. But they've done some really good work to try and streamline that and to put up some really valuable information that I think I share with my students every year that can be really helpful. So I'll point out some of those things as well. Before we start looking at some artwork though, again, this is all part of that. It's available online on the website, but this is the first thing that any of us do before we look at any artwork. We go through the rubric and we go through those quantifiers. And there's your 6 through 1 scoring rubric. What I usually share with my kids, and we're all different, but what I found is that rubric is really big. right? When we talk about what delineates between a 6 and a 5 and a 4 and 3 and a 2 and a 1, we go through that. But typically what I share with my kids in stress are the key scoring descriptors. So this puts it into more of a bite-sized chunk that the kids can start to get on board with more immediacy. So when they start having questions about those differences in the scoring points, we start getting into that. But to start with, where it's not so overwhelming, these are the key scoring descriptors. And I want to, at least for tonight, focus on a few of them that I think, again, can really push some of those kids who maybe don't have that technical skill into areas where they can still score really high. Am I moving at an okay pace?
Sorry, you said 3 people, different judges judge the quality, and
Yes.
then 2 for breadth and 2 for concentration?
Correct.
And they're totally all different people?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you, sorry.
Yep, absolutely. And you can't obviously score your own students' work. So there is a button where if you come up and you see your students' work, then you just defer that to another reader or table reader.
Thank you.
And it's happened. I've seen my own kids' work when I was scoring. So the first one is originality, imagination, and invention of composition. So this changes a little bit every year, and mostly it's just subtle nuances in the verbiage. But this is becoming, in my estimation, what we see more important, not just in AP, but for colleges and universities and art schools. They're really looking for students who can think originally, who can innovate, and can create inventions in composition. Experimentation and risk-taking is big too. We want our students to be able to take risks, and sometimes that can be scary for our kids, and sometimes that can be scary for us, right? And I'll get back to that in a moment too, because that can be problematic. Confident, evocative work and engagement of the viewer. So we all have different perspectives on kind of what we teach, how we teach, and what's most important. But what I share with my kids all the time is that really great art will evoke an emotional, an intellectual, or a visceral response. And if you can do that, you're going to have something that's really special. And it doesn't necessarily always matter how well you can render or paint or sculpt. That's the idea. It's trying to evoke that visceral, emotional, or intellectual response. And I'm going to touch just a little bit on appropriation. If you're interested on a little more of that, I'm actually talking briefly at the Scholastics breakout session tomorrow. I did a big session on that last year, and they've asked me to talk just a little bit about that tomorrow. But I'm just going to touch on that tonight in terms of how that can be used. Because I think sometimes we think of appropriation as a bad word, and it's not. There's a really, really big difference between appropriation and misappropriation, right? And we talked about that. And I'll give you some examples, both from AP as well as Scholastics. That's good. So, let's start with the technical competence, right? All the images that I'm going to share with you are works that were either featured in the AP National Exhibition or national winners from Scholastics. So we're all looking at really, really high achieving works of art. So we can look at a piece like this and say, this is an upper level piece, right? I usually have my kids break it down just the way that we do it in a reading. So immediately what we do is we say, is it lower register, middle register, or upper register? And we make that determination right away. So is it a 1-2, a 3-4, or 5-6? And we can usually do that pretty immediately. And then we say, okay, if this is an upper register, is it a 5 or a 6? And this is beautiful. This is a 5 or 6, right? Mm-hmm. Not all my kids can do that, right? Not all of our kids can do that. I mean, this is really wonderful technical excellence with something like this. As is this, right? These are beautiful pieces. Now for me, if I'm looking at this as an AP reader, there is a distinction between these two pieces, right? When I talk about evoking that emotional response, evocative, that engages the viewer, between here and here, this is probably a stronger piece.